right, everybody, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always ready to dive in.
Today, we're tackling something that's absolutely critical for anyone doing business in Nigeria.
Definitely important.
We're talking about contract law, but not just the basics.
Oh, no.
This is about those sneaky little things that can completely derail a contract.
The things people don't always see coming.
Exactly what we call vitiating elements. Sounds kind of ominous, right?
It kind of is.
Like hidden traps in a contract that can explode when you least expect it.
And you know what the worst part is?
What's that?
These vitiating elements aren't always obvious.
So you could think you have a rock-solid deal. Everything looks great on paper.
All signed, sealed, delivered.
And then, boom.
You've got a major legal headache.
And nobody wants that. So let's break this down for our listeners.
Absolutely.
What exactly are these vitiating elements in plain English?
Okay, so in the simplest terms, they're factors that can invalidate a contract.
Invalidate meaning?
It could mean the contract becomes completely unenforceable.
Like it never existed.
Basically, yeah, it's void. Or it could give one party the option to just back out.
Ah, so it's voidable.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm certain to see why this is important. Can you give us a real-world example? Something businesses in Nigeria might actually encounter.
Absolutely. Let's say you're a business owner and you're importing cocoa beans.
Delicious.
You agree to buy a whole shipment at a premium price because the seller tells you they're organic.
Sounds like a good deal.
But then you find out later they were lying.
Oh, no.
The beans weren't organic at all.
That's not good.
And that lie, the misrepresentation, that's a classic vitiating element.
So as the buyer, you could say, hey, this isn't what I agreed to.
Exactly. You could walk away from the deal.
And not lose your money.
Exactly. Or you could even sue for damages because of the deception.
So it's not just about what's written in the contract itself.
Oh.
It's about the stuff happening around it.
It's about the context, the whole picture.
The information exchange, the pressure tactics, maybe.
You got it. And here's the thing about Nigeria.
What's that?
The legal system here can be really complex.
In what way?
You've got a mix of different laws and regulations. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they clash.
Sounds messy.
It can be. And then you've got cultural nuances that come into play. You know, how business is done here.
Right, it's not always black and white.
Definitely not. That's what makes navigating these vitiating elements tricky.
Okay, let's dive into some specifics then. What are some of the most common ones that pop up in Nigeria? I feel like I've heard some crazy stories, especially in sectors like agriculture.
You're right on the money. Misrepresentation is a huge one in Nigeria.
Like our cocoa bean example.
Exactly. One party makes a false statement on purpose or not, and that tricks the other party into signing the contract.
And that can be grounds for breaking the contract.
Absolutely. And there's a landmark case here in Nigeria that illustrates this perfectly.
Oh, tell me about it.
It's the case of Okafor v. ACB Ltd. A bank misrepresented the interest rate on a loan to a customer.
Classic bait and switch.
Pretty much. The customer, Mr. Okafor, ended up suing the bank.
And he won.
He did. The court recognized that the bank's misrepresentation was a vitiating element and sided with Mr. Okafor.
That's a relief to hear.
It is, but it also shows you how important it is to be aware of these things. But remember, misrepresentation isn't always intentional. Sometimes it's an honest mistake.
So even if everyone's trying to do the right thing, a contract can still be voided.
It can, especially if it's what we call a mutual mistake.
Mutual mistake.
Meaning both parties are wrong about a crucial fact.
Give me an example.
Okay. Imagine you're buying a big plot of land to build a factory.
Big investment.
Huge. And both you and the seller are convinced it's zoned for industrial use. Everything seems fine. But then it turns out the land is actually zoned for residential buildings only.
Oh no, that's a disaster.
Total disaster for your factory plans.
So that mutual mistake about the zoning.
That could make the entire contract voidable.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just about someone trying to pull a fast one?
Definitely not.
What about situations where someone is pressured or manipulated into signing a contract?
Ah, that's where duress and undue influence come into play.
Okay, those sound a bit more sinister.
They can be. Duress is the more straightforward one. It's basically when someone uses threats or force to make you sign a contract.
Like, sign this or else.
Pretty much. But undue influence is trickier. It's more about exploiting a relationship of trust to get an unfair advantage.
Ooh, that sounds sneaky. Can you give us a scenario for that one?
Absolutely. Picture this. You have a young entrepreneur in Nigeria, super ambitious, and they're desperate for funding to get their business off the ground.
I can see it now.
Along comes a well-connected investor. Seems like a dream come true, right?
Yeah, seems too good to be true almost.
Exactly. The investor offers funding, but they slip in some sneaky clauses in the contract. Clauses that give them a lot of control over the business.
Taking advantage of the entrepreneur's eagerness.
Exactly. They exploit that desperation for funding, and that could be considered undue influence. The entrepreneur might feel like they had no choice but to sign.
Wow, so we've got innocent mistakes, we've got deliberate deception, we've got pressure tactics. These vitiating elements really covered a lot of ground. But let's talk about the real-world consequences here. How does this actually play out for businesses in Nigeria?
The impact can be absolutely devastating. I'm talking about financial losses, reputational damage, the whole 9 yards.
No one wants that.
Definitely not. And these vitiating elements, they can lead to these long, drawn-out legal battles.
Draining time and money.
Exactly. And not just for the companies involved. It can clog up the legal system, too.
Yeah.
There was a case a while back involving two massive oil companies in Nigeria.
I bet that was in the news.
It was huge. They had this joint venture agreement, and things went sour really fast.
What happened?
Accusations started flying left and right, claims of misrepresentation, undue influence, you name it.
Sounds
It was a complete mess. The case dragged on for years and ended up costing them millions in legal fees alone.
Yikes.
And that's not all. Their reputations took a major hit. International partners started getting nervous. It was a whole domino effect.
That's a cautionary tale if I've ever heard one. So knowing all of this, what are some practical steps that businesses in Nigeria can take? How can they protect themselves from these potential contract disasters?
Well, the first and most important thing is simple, but it's often overlooked. Due diligence.
The homework before you sign anything.
Exactly. Before you even think about signing a contract, you need to thoroughly vet the other party.
Vet meaning.
Check them out. Look
Yeah.
into their background, their financial history, their reputation.
See if they've been involved in any shady dealings before.
Exactly. And if the contract involves specific claims, like in that cocoa bean scenario,
Right, say the beans are organic.
then we need to verify every single one of those claims. Don't just take their word for it,
Especially when it comes to things like financial details, I imagine.
especially financial details. And if you start to sense something's off,
Like if your gut is telling you something's fishy.
listen to your gut. Be extra cautious if you suspect there might be undue influence at play.
Like in that entrepreneur-investor example.
Exactly. Look closely at the relationship between the parties. Are there any power imbalances? Is one party much more experienced or influential than the other?
Red flags to watch out for.
Big time. And alongside due diligence.
What else?
The contract itself needs to be rock solid. I'm talking airtight, no loopholes, no room for ambiguity.
So no handshake deals or verbal agreements.
Those are recipes for disaster, especially here in Nigeria. Get everything in writing.
So use clear, unambiguous language. Spell everything out in detail.
Precisely. Don't leave anything open to interpretation.
Makes sense. And make sure the contract aligns with all the relevant Nigerian laws and regulations, right?
Absolutely. That's where having a legal expert on your side comes in.
Okay, so due diligence, airtight contracts, and of course, get a lawyer to look over everything before you sign that dotted line.
You've got it. Those are your 3 pillars of protection.
Great advice. So as we wrap up our deep dive into these sometimes treacherous waters of vitiating elements,
It can be a minefield out there.
it definitely can be. The key takeaway is awareness is your best defense. Stay informed about the common pitfalls, do your homework before signing anything, and don't be afraid to walk away if things don't feel right.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The contract is only as strong as its foundation, so make sure yours is built on solid ground.
And on that note, folks, we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Until then, stay savvy and stay safe.